Customer service is often talked about, but not often delivered on. In fact, it's one of the biggest complaints that both businesses and consumers have. Most say companies they do business with either offer poor service or no service at all. Companies are looking to cut costs, and typically, customer service is one of the first departments to get hit. Yet customer service might be the key to growing your business, particularly in highly competitive markets. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. Each week, we sit down with industry leaders and innovators to gain valuable insights that we can use to grow our businesses. Today, we're joined by Greg Rich, CEO of Vivantio, a company that uses automation to help companies leverage customer service to scale their businesses. In this podcast, Greg talks about the biggest and costliest mistake companies make around customer service, how to automate customer service without losing the personalization that customers want, and small modifications that companies can make to level up the service they deliver. Good customer service starts with having the right people in key positions who understand both your product and your customers. Finding those people is not always easy. In fact, it's become increasingly difficult. That's why leading companies turn to AsiaNet consultants to help them fill key positions. AsiaNet has over 3 decades of experience successfully finding the best people to fill even really difficult to fill roles. You can learn more about them over at their website, asianetconsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes for this episode on our website over at www.seat.fm. Meanwhile, let's sit down with Greg and find out how we can turn customer service into a profit center. Greg, thank you so much for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. It is really good to have you with us, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you about all the different things that you've been developing.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, nice to be here.
So customer service is something that's often talked about, but not often delivered on. It's one of those things that it's sort of the biggest complaint that you hear from both other businesses and from consumers when they're talking about some of the companies that they work with. At the same time, we see that one of the biggest trends going on is automating customer service, right? Replacing service representatives with chatbots or directing people to sort of a do-it-yourself kind of a solution. In your opinion, what's the biggest mistake that you see companies making with regard to customer service?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think actually to your point, I think one of the issues that I do see at the moment is organizations that are trying to lean too heavy on the technology and removing the agent from the process. And our experience, certainly with the customers that we have, is the agent is still critical in resolution. That you can go so far with automation, you can go so far with digital self-service and so far with AI, but it can't solve all of the problems for all the customers. So I think it's really important to map out and understand your customer journey and think about the types of customers that you have and the types of requests that you get from those customers and map those journeys out from end to end, and then make sure that you put the relevant and the suitable technology in place at the right points during that journey. And an agent's often, more often than not, is going to be part of that process. And we've all seen it. I mean, when I access customer services, whether it be through, retailers or whatever, so often, you get into the chatbot and it's just, oh, no, not this again. And it can be really frustrating because you just want to speak to somebody. You understand that the problem that you have is more complicated than, a chatbot is going to be able to help you with. If you're asking for directions, then fine. But if you've got a complex problem, you just need to speak to somebody. So making sure that those chatbots or, like I say, digital self-service is geared towards ensuring that it's thinking about the right journey for that customer. That's where I see a lot of organizations failing at the moment. They kind of want to replace the agent with the technology, and it's not always, you can't replace one with the other. It's a combination of both.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think you're right. People do see it as an either or situation. Based on your experience, is there a way to get the benefits of the technology without losing the personalization that customers want? I mean, how could that be done?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, everyone talks about AI these days, and I suppose, we've certainly invested time and effort in, especially on the digital side of things, in terms of self-service and providing solutions to customers. But personalization can still be done by making sure that you capture information about each of your customers. So we talk about, like a 360-degree view of your customer. We don't think of service and support or our customer service platform being a single object. We integrate with many third-party tools, whether it be CRM, whether it's a customer experience software, to make sure that we can pull information in that is relevant to a single customer. And once you have a much wider and broader understanding of who that customer is, what their likes are, what their dislikes are, how they like to be treated, what kind of requests you've had from them in the past, then you can start thinking about providing customizable and personalized service, whether it's to the agent, giving the agent information that they can use during their conversation, or whether it's through self-service technologies or through WhatsApp, whatever it might be. But start to use that information that are in those other systems within your service and support environment to provide personalization to individuals.
I think that's really interesting. It seems that you're suggesting that rather than having a one size fits all kind of a solution, that you need to have sort of multiple ways that a customer can interact with you.
Yeah, because a customer interacts with all parts of the business typically. Maybe it's slightly different for internal IT, but if you think about customer service, they talk to your finance team, they talk to procurement, they talk to sales, they talk to your customer success team, and then of course they talk to the support team when they've got issues. And every single one of those touch points is important. And it's not until you look at the entire, like I said, either the customer journey or the customer interactions that you have across your business, that do you truly understand the relationship you have with that customer, and then how you can use that relationship that you have to, like I say, offer personalized service, which could even be providing them with more services and products that you could offer. If you understand what they're doing, what they're using, then there is an opportunity through the service team to offer more, more value, and to provide more service, which could obviously result in more revenue. So it works. It's important to track that both from the consumer perspective, but even for the business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think that you're right. People don't realize the added value that can be achieved through a customer service representative if they're well trained and talking to the customer in terms of getting them to buy other services or to expand what they're doing. I noticed that years ago when I was getting tech support from one of, I think it might have been one of the hosting companies for web. And while the guy was helping me with something, he was mentioning other stuff they did. And because he was being so helpful and all, and he wasn't really pushing something on me, he was just saying, yeah, we also do this and that. And, maybe you want to look into that one day. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I ended up taking that service. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really smart. They actually,
it is.
yeah, they solved my problem and they got me to buy something else.
Yeah, but obviously, something you obviously realized that you needed or you wanted. So, like I said, it's kind of that co-creation of value, we call it. It doesn't have to be through sales. It doesn't have to be through your success team. Everybody in your organization can provide, added value.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there other things that you feel customer service could be doing to help the company grow, and yet companies are overlooking those opportunities?
Yeah, so the other area, I mean, one of the big problems we're seeing at the moment in the industry is the sort of technical debt that exists at the moment in terms of resource. So, there are, I can't remember the statistic that Gartner gave me a couple of months ago, but it's several 100,000 jobs in the US alone that are unfilled at the moment, technical jobs, whether it be in IT or customer service and support. So, of course, what that is doing is it's putting a huge amount of demand and burden on existing teams, who are trying to field more requests and deal with more support tickets than ever before with fewer people. So, one of the things that we at Vivantio have been trying to do is to help organizations think about scaling their operations whilst, not reducing head by count, but making better use of the head count that they've got. And, AI has played a big part in that in terms of generative feedback to consumers. How can we take all the knowledge that exists within our system and potentially provide a really simple and easy solution to a customer without them having to read through all our knowledge base articles to get to a solution. But obviously, it also helps in terms of triage, or reduce the amount of triage that needs to take place by trying to capture as much information up front as you possibly can, so that you can use that information to move that ticket or that request to the right resolver group from the very first instant, from the first contact. And that can have a big impact on reducing the workload on teams, or helping them to manage the workload that they have. So it is a big problem for organizations at the moment. The demand, since COVID, since the sort of digital transformation that's taken place, demand has increased significantly on teams, and yet there's not enough agents there to help resolve those. So how can technology help bridge that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. Of all the different technologies out there, do you see one that you feel is either underutilized, or maybe that you would be advising people that they should be, thinking about either, bringing it in to begin with, or at least making more use out of it?
Yeah, it's like I've mentioned a couple of times, but the digital self-service is a big one for me. So that's essentially a self-service portal that
Right.
is built, and it's designed to look like the organization, in terms of brand. But there are so many advantages to try and get your customers to come to you via a solution like that. Like I said, you can use AI to try and get them the answers to those problems before they even speak to an agent. You can integrate it with the chatbot, so you can actually start a conversation going and try to triage that beforehand. Or if it turns into a request, based on the type of request, you can ask, you can go through a script or a series of questions to capture relevant information, which allows you then to route that ticket internally. And it allows you to communicate back and forth with the customer. So you stay in constant communication. I mean, one of the big problems that most consumers face when dealing with service teams is just, I don't know what's going on, what's happening to my request, where are we? And being able to log in and actually even see the interactions that are taking place internally at an organization just gives the consumer just more a better feeling that it's being dealt with, and that someone's dealing with it. So I think that's a big thing. Omni-channel support, again, we talked about before this show, but Microsoft Teams and Slack and other messaging platforms, WhatsApp even, we're finding that consumers these days are wanting to interact with the service desk in many different ways, and I think it's important to find solutions and technologies that allow people to work in the way that's more comfortable for them. But like I said, steering them to, even if you're using some of those messaging tools, trying to steer them to self-service, which can still load on your phone. They're still responsive, and it still works like an app, but it does allow the teams to capture information that can significantly reduce the workload and make them more efficient in handling large numbers of requests.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of companies that maybe are just getting started in service-based products or services don't understand, is just how much you need to be able to support a customer service operation. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
It is. I mean, one of the things that we've started to talk about more recently is thinking about best practice frameworks. ITIL 4 is the most, just kind of the latest one as it relates to service and support. It's something that's been around in Europe and the UK. I was sort of a practitioner of it, 15 years ago when it first came out, and it's not as relevant, or it hasn't been as the uptake in the US, we haven't seen as big as we have in the UK. But I would certainly implore people to go and have a look at that, Google it and check out the framework, because it really does talk about, how to develop a continuous service improvement program, and it looks at all different types of requests that come in. And it's not just for IT. The ITIL 4 framework is designed for any service team now, in terms of how to actually develop a service environment, a service organization, how to report on that service, to understand where you're doing well or where you can look for service improvements. That's something that we're sort of advocates for, and I think that's a big point I'd recommend people to go and have a look at that.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm really glad you brought that up, because so often if customer service is even thought about at all, and oftentimes it's just overlooked, I think that understanding what you need to do to make it really good, and that it needs to have continuous improvement, is so important. It's not just something that you slap on, right? As you're saying, you have to keep thinking about how to make it better, more efficient, more customized. So I think it's important that you've brought that to everybody's attention.
Yeah, I think the other big thing as well is making sure that organizations understand the value that service and support has to the business. We've started to hear Gartner and Forbes talk about service and support being the new growth engine, or customer experience being the new growth engine, and I couldn't agree more. In a world now where you can review your organization's customers, products, and services, and the impact those reviews have on you continue to sell products and services to other consumers. That the advocacy that comes from that is so important. It has a big impact on. We always sort of say, like, happy customers are loyal customers, and retention is a big problem for lots of organizations. So service support and customer experience play a big part in that. So most organizations are really thinking about customer service and support as a growth engine now, not a profit center. So it never has it been more important than the customer journey, customer experience be front of mind for a lot of organizations as you think about scaling their business.
Yeah, that's really true. There's a lot of focus, right, on, as you said, on growth, on acquisition, but acquisition is really, really expensive, and getting more expensive, it's seemingly every day. So as you're pointing out, the investment in customer service, which could lead to retention, could actually be the more profitable way, right, to grow the business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, what got you interested in customer service? I mean, it's not often that I hear someone saying that they chose to go into customer service. So what's a little bit, can you tell us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in honesty, it probably goes back to when I was a teenager. My parents owned a residential home in the southwest of England, so that was a home for the elderly. And I grew up. We lived there. I was part of the wider family, and saw it from an early age. And then my first real access to sort of technology was in the early 90s, working for a social landlord. So this was I think it was the largest housing association in the southwest of England. So these were providing low-cost homes to people all over the southwest, and sheltered accommodation, things like that. So it was a really interesting time for me, because one, it really gave me a sense of achievement working for an organization that was there to help others. That was their ultimate goal, providing support, not just in terms of housing, but in financial aid, in terms of maintenance, in terms of trying to get people onto the property ladder that couldn't normally afford it. I thought that was really important. Mm-hmm. But obviously it gave me access to technology, which was really something I'd never really touched before. It was 10 years working at Nightstone that really kind of bridged those two things together. How can I use tech? To me, it was really important to understand how the technology in an organization was providing the tools to the organization that would help other people. So that's how I kind of thought about it. I wasn't just working in IT, like solving problems, with Microsoft Word and fixing printers and things like that. I was really thinking about, well, if I don't do this, what impact does it have on the tenants of our homes? Does it mean maintenance doesn't happen? Does it mean that they can't get financial aid? So I was really sort of thinking about the impact on others, and that's really how I kind of ended up getting into this. At the time, service management software didn't really exist. There was lots of help desk products, and there were lots of really enterprise, BMC, HP, CA all had kind of enterprise service management tools. And there was just nothing for the small company, nothing mid-market. And then we were going into the 2000s, where all of a sudden web-based technology started to take off, and Vivantio was kind of ahead of its time, really, as we developed the first web-based application on demand, we called it at the time, thinking about small companies, small to medium companies, and how they could get access to technology that would allow them to provide service and support to their customers.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and you're right. It's been sort of a field leveler when you look at SaaS-based service or on demand or all of that, because it's enabled, as you're saying, any company really to be able to have access to tools that it used to be only the very big players could have.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And even the complexity of those tools, it was just very, very difficult. And it is even today, there's still the enterprise players that are out there, like ServiceNow and so on, who have fantastic products, but they're Goliaths. They take a long time to implement. They need a huge amount of resource in terms of maintaining those systems. Sometimes dedicated engineers just to keep those systems up and running in large organizations. And companies like Vivantio are really here to kind of demystify that and say, no, it doesn't have to be that complicated. You can have access to enterprise technology without the heavy lifting that's involved, with some of these other enterprise players.
Yeah, that's really important, because there are so many companies, small to medium size, that need to have this technology, but do not have a dedicated, even sometimes a dedicated person, but certainly not a department with a hierarchy of tech support in-house that can, implement, like you're saying, and troubleshoot and do everything that needs doing to keep that running. So to be able to have something that's a bit more sort of off the shelf, on demand, that's accessible, not only in terms of what it costs, but also in terms of what it takes, right, to implement it and then to continue to work with it, is really
to maintain it. That was one of the big things that when we first started designing the product from the ground up, we always talked about configuration or customization, which is less relevant today. I think people can cope with a bit of customization, certainly with no code platforms, but our concepts from day one were, how do we enable the customer to use this system? We didn't want them coming to us. It didn't make sense for a SaaS organization to have to rely heavily on our resources, especially as a small business. We didn't want to tie up our time considerably in providing professional services.
Right.
We wanted to continue developing the product and so on. And we saw that as an advantage, both to us and to the customer, to develop solutions that they could administer themselves. So like I said, no code, even complex workflows can be built out by somebody with very little knowledge of service solutions. So yeah, it's been a sort of unique point for Vivantio for a long period of time.
Yeah, that's really good. And you're right. No code has just been a game changer across a huge swath of different software applications. Between SaaS and no code, you're right. It has become to the point where just about anybody can implement technology in their organization and really,
Absolutely.
and take huge advantage of things that you couldn't even dream of just, I don't know, even 5 years
even a few
ago.
years ago.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I can think of the technology that we use in our organization, and we're very small, but we really are able to bring in unbelievable resources nowadays that before, you couldn't even think about.
No. You'd be looking for people with, 10 or 15 years worth of dedicated skill set, within those technologies, who are very expensive and very good at what they did. But and even the time it takes to make changes is significant. We're a Salesforce user, internally, and we have our own systems engineer specifically to manage that instance for us. And even the changes then take time. It's not something that you can just do quickly and switch on or switch off. It's and a lot of organizations, in the service support world, suffer those same problems as well. And of course, as we were talking about before, with the sort of skill shortage at the moment, if you don't have access to that resource, you do need to, and things are shifting so quickly at the moment, in terms of digital transformation, in terms of change within organizations. You need to be able to pivot so fast. And, if you have to rely on service engineers to make those changes, it can be very difficult for operations teams to move quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. It really becomes a deterrent for companies to implement something when you tell them you have
Yep,
to get the software on board, you have to hire various people who can then run it for you every day, and then suddenly it becomes, just overwhelming. People say, well, forget about
absolutely.
it. We're just going to
Yeah, yeah,
we'll just keep doing what we've always been doing.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Now, when you look at customer service, what do you see as sort of the next big thing? I know, just up until now, it's really been sort of chatbots, and then it was AI driven chat, or various things around AI. What do you see are things that we should look forward to? What's under development, or what might be coming somewhere down the road?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we're looking at the moment and focusing on. One, again, it goes back to continuous service improvement that we talked about before, but predictive analysis is something that we're spending a lot of time on. And it's done in a couple of ways. AI is part of that in terms of being able to understand, like I said, actually map out the customer journey digitally. It's not really AI; it's more machine learning than anything else, if I'm completely honest. And the other is obviously the reporting and the KPI and the tracking that goes along with that, and understanding based on previous experience what the typical outcome of a type of request is, and then being able to predict that as it comes into the service desk, and ideally solve it before it even becomes a problem. So that's definitely one of the areas that we're sort of spending a lot of time in at the moment. The other that customers are asking for, and that we're starting to look at now, is really starting to benchmark across organizations. So, with so much information in the cloud now as it relates to KPIs, performance management, performance tracking, is being able to use quantitative data analysis to allow our customers to look at their peers who are using other service platforms or Vivantio, and to be able to compare how they're doing to those peers. What do their resolution times look like? How are they managing their service level agreements? Are they meeting those? How many escalations are taking place? Things like that. Again, really about service improvement. How is my organization performing to other organizations that look like me? And where can we think about improving service? So those are a couple of areas. I had thought of a third, and it's just as I was talking, it was just slipping my mind. So hopefully it'll come back to me.
Yeah, I think those are very good points. And I think that anyone who is serious about customer service, and as we've been discussing, if you're not serious about customer service, then you're not really serious about customers, because it's
No,
literally pointless to spend a tremendous amount of money recruiting customers, spending all that time and effort on customer acquisition if you're going to lose them. So, you might as
absolutely.
well be focused on keeping them. And if you are, then obviously continual improvement on your customer service support has got to be a vital part of that. And, we don't really think about that, right? We think about product development. We think about, obviously sales growth, and perhaps other aspects of the business. And customer service is just something that always is sort of like the, third, sort of the
It's an
fifth wheel,
afterthought
right?
sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah,
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 yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
It's never really prioritized. But I think that we're coming into a day and age when smart companies are going to be putting customer service at the front of the organization, so to speak.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah, well, Greg, you've really shared a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts. And I think that for so many people who are listening to this, it's got to have been very thought provoking to hear what you've been sharing. And, it sort of triggers you to rethink what you're doing in your own organization and how you could possibly do better. Um, if people want to reach out to you with their own questions, and I'm sure a lot of people do, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so a couple of ways. One, I would suggest, going to our website and subscribing to our newsletter. You can do that from the blogs area or the resources area from the site. We do share a ton of best practice tips and tricks, for service and support teams on a weekly basis. A couple of posts going out per week that I think people will find useful. If you send an email into info@vivantio.com, that will land in my inbox. So if anybody's got any questions from what they've heard today, happy to speak to them about that. And of course, we're on LinkedIn too, so you can check us out there on our LinkedIn site. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll include the various links you've mentioned in the show notes for this
Oh,
episode.
thanks.
Yeah, and that'll be over on our website at www.seat.fm. So you'll be able to actually find all the links there that'll be clickable. And I'd just like to thank you again, Greg, for being with us.
No, thank you very much, Jane. Really liked being here, and thanks to all the listeners as well.